A story that I loved as a preteen was Swiss Family Robinson. My introduction to that was the Walt Disney movie, and then later I read the book. To refresh you on the story, in case you don't recall it or haven't heard it, the Robinson family is fleeing Switzerland in the mid-19th century, headed to New Guinea. They're getting away from the Napoleonic Wars. And they're on a sailing ship headed that way when pirates come up and begin to chase them. And the ship's captain takes the ship into a storm where the ship is badly battered. The sailors and the captain are fearing for their lives, so they abandon ship and they abandon the Robinson family. Not very courageous, I would think. Well, the ship wrecks on an island. And there is the Robinson family stranded on this island. The mother, the father, and their 3 sons, plus the captain's 2 Great Danes. And they began to try and make a life there. And so they find that the island is rich with all kinds of adventure and all kinds of animals and foliage. And so they begin to take the ship apart and take things out of the ship. And they build this incredible tree house where they live. And they need to be up in this tree because there's a tiger that is stalking the family. The pirates eventually come back. There's a big battle. The family, with the help of a ship that's on their side that comes up and out of nowhere and helps defend them. And the family, in the end, makes the decision that this place where they hadn't planned to live but ended up by accident and by tragedy is now their home. And they decide, even when they have the opportunity, that they're going to stay where they've ended up. There's so many things I love about that story. I read that book, I lost track how many times I read the book. Not the original by Johann Weiss, I think that's how you pronounce his name, but the Walt Disney version of the book. I read and reread that book. I remember when I got it. We were going to 67th Street United Methodist Church in Birmingham. We had an Easter egg hunt, and I won the Easter egg hunt. And I got to have first choice of the prizes, and there was that book. I did eventually read the original, and it's good too, but what I really remember is the images from that movie and from that book. There's so many things I like about it. You know, certainly it's for a boy, you know, that it's this adventure story of a sailing ship and pirates. But also, I think there was something in that story that spoke to my personality, because I've always, since then, liked stories about people and groups that adapt when the circumstances are such that their plans are completely blown apart and they have to figure out how to make the best with what they have. Another example is Apollo 13. You may have seen that movie. Remember in that story where they're going to the moon and there's an explosion and all the astronauts, to save their lives, have to get into the lunar landing module, and suddenly they realize that the air is not being filtered. And not only that, the air filter from the command module doesn't work in the lunar module. So they have to fabricate from what they have at hand a filter. I love those kind of stories. Because in many ways that's the way life is, isn't it? To put this in some kind of framework, I want to share something with you that I heard at a conference a couple of years ago. Donna Moat, who's the chaplain to the Atlanta airport, the Episcopal chaplain. I bet you didn't know there was an Episcopal chaplain to the Atlanta airport. Donna did a program that I attended in which she talked about how often life works out a particular way. We live in a period of orientation. We are oriented. We've got our lives figured out and a structure and a routine. And then something happens and we're disoriented. And there's this period of disorientation that is upsetting. And what we really work toward is that final step of being reoriented. Reorientation. So you have orientation, disorientation, reorientation. And I see that so clearly in that story of the Robinson family. They were already a little disoriented, headed away from their home in Switzerland in a sailing ship to this island in the Pacific. But they began, I'm sure, on that trip, have become somewhat oriented to their routine when they're disoriented again by the pirates and then by the shipwreck. And so their lives on that island is a time of getting reoriented. This continual time of getting reoriented so that they do get back to a period of orientation. That's the way all of our lives happen to be, really, if you think about it. None of this probably sounds new to you because you know in your own life, those times where you've been oriented a particular way, something happens and you're disoriented, and then you get reoriented. Some of those are not unexpected, except you haven't been through it before. Graduation from high school, graduation from college. Those are times of having been oriented a particular way for many, many years. There's this period of disorientation. Oh my gosh, I've graduated. I've never been to a university that big. What's that going to be like? There were 100 people in my graduating class in high school, or 50, or 10. Then we get through with college, and suddenly we're disoriented because we just took for granted all those people that we saw in the cafeteria or in the food court. We could just go talk to a friend at any time. So we have to get reoriented. We change jobs. Happy about that new job, but it's a whole new ballgame. And for many of us, myself included, retirement comes. I retired at least a couple of times so far, looking toward another retirement when I leave here. But, there is that time of retirement. It's, I've got all this free time. Really? Well, to state the obvious, maybe you know where I'm going with this. We are in a period of profound disorientation. As individuals, as families, as communities, as a country, as a church. We are in a profound time of disorientation that will not seem to quit. Thinking about that. Because of this pandemic, our family lives are disoriented, our work lives are disoriented, our school lives are disoriented, and our church lives are disoriented. All these things that we thought were somewhat settled, knowing that they weren't going to stay settled forever, all these things that were somewhat settled and we were oriented, all of them have changed. And so we're constantly in this period of trying to get reoriented. How many of you have now done Zoom? I'm not even sure I'd heard of Zoom a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And yet, this is how a lot of people are staying connected. That's how people are doing their jobs. It's how people are going to school. It's how people are worshiping together, having meetings in the church together. So there's this continual sense of being disoriented and this desire to get reoriented again. It's only human. It's only human. For me, one of the most difficult parts of this disorientation is church life. It is to state the obvious, it is very, very strange to be in a church having a worship service with maybe a half dozen people and speaking to people who are watching either live or going to watch a recording of me later. Even though I've been in a lot of different churches in my time as my 33 years as a priest, it was always in an Episcopal church, somewhat familiar. This is not. So it's this continual reorientation. And perhaps you are like me, I'm willing to guess you are, that you count on church, even when all these other things are happening in your life, a job change, retirement, an illness, any of those things, a new school, a death in the family. You count on church being a place, I do, where you can get reoriented or maintain your orientation that was already there. Yet here we are. Here we are. And we can't do anything about it except try to be faithful to Jesus Christ and to the gospel and do the best we can. Speaking of the gospel, if you look at the gospel and look at who Jesus is, Jesus had a proclivity for disorienting people. As a matter of fact, that's what his whole ministry was about. I want to talk about that in the context of the disciples. Think about those people minding their own business as fishermen or as a tax collector or whatever else they were doing their work, and suddenly he says, "Come and follow me." For some reason they did. And so there's this whole kind of disorientation for them. That routine of going to the shore and getting in their boat and fishing has suddenly gone away. And they're following this man, this teacher, who every day something new happens. He heals somebody. He says something in a sermon or just in passing that really shakes their world. And then today, we hear about Jesus teaching. They're probably used to him teaching. But it's getting close to time to eat. And they say, we need to do something about this. Let's send them away. Jesus, you need to send them on their way so they can go somewhere and get something to eat. He says, no, you do it. I'm sure they're going, yeah, right. How? So this disorientation comes up again. All we have are 5 loaves and 2 fish. So Jesus takes it, and he looks to heaven. This is the only miracle that appears in all 4 Gospels, and I really like what John says about this, because John just doesn't have him looking to heaven. John says, and he gave thanks. So we're going to imply in that looking to heaven that Jesus was giving thanks for what he had. He gave thanks for what he had, and he blessed it, and he broke the bread and shared it, and it was enough. As a matter of fact, it was more than enough. There were leftovers. So again, Jesus comes into those people's lives and he disorients them, because what he is wanting them to do is to be reoriented to the thing that in the end is life-giving. The thing that in the end, that no matter what happens in our school lives, in our work lives, in our retirement lives, in our family lives, in our church lives, that no matter what happens there, that he is the one we can turn to again and again. He is our orientation. Up to a point. Because he's never going to stop both challenging us and comforting us. Because he wants to challenge us again and again to turn to him, to follow him, to love him, and in loving him, to love our neighbor. And love God. One of the things I think, too, about being oriented, disoriented, and reoriented, there are little moments in my life when I look back and I think, oh, so that's what happened there. It's not on as big a scale as what's going on now, but for years I was involved with a ministry called Blackerby. It's like Curcio, if you know anything about Curcio. It's a weekend away. We have talks and small group discussion and prayers and singing and play. Blackerby, though, is for young adults, 18 to 30, about discerning their vocation. And the basic format is there are a bunch of talks. Somebody gives a talk. Then you talk about that talk and maybe do some activity around it. Well, these talks are supposed to be about 10 minutes long. One time, a priest, gave a 45-minute talk. And it blew up the schedule. Completely blew up the schedule. And so those of us who had been at a whole bunch of these Blackerbys put our heads together. Another priest who had been to as many as I had. I was spiritual director for the 13 of the first 14. And the lay rector, a young adult, who had been to a bunch of these. And we had to redesign the rest of the schedule for the weekend. And you know what? We never went back to the old schedule because that 45-minute talk by that priest ended up changing our schedule in a better way. We never had to warn, by the way, we never had to warn the lay people about not talking too long. It was always the clergy. So here we are, doing the best we can, as individuals, as families, and as a church. As we've had this orientation of this is how we do church. We always have Eucharist. And yet now, we can't do that. And so what now we're going to do most of the time is morning prayer, which is a rich, rich piece of our Anglican Episcopal tradition. And it is worship. We're also going to keep the church basically empty for a pretty good while yet to go. So that's another way of, again, the disorientation for you and for me as we figure out that we can indeed worship in a meaningful way together via Zoom, via Facebook, watching it live on Justin's camera, or when we get our cameras back on those cameras, watching it live there or recorded, that there is a meaningful way to worship in which we are reoriented yet again toward Jesus Christ, who calls us to come and follow Him no matter what. Whether it's familiar, whether it's a time of us being oriented or disoriented or reoriented, He says, come and follow me. Because that's where the real life is, and that is our true orientation, always toward Jesus Christ, who was and is and always will be the one who orients us as He calls us to come and follow. I do have a few announcements before our service concludes. One thing I want to announce to you on behalf of the search committee and the committee that's working on the parish profile, the subcommittee, later this week on Thursday, a parish survey will be emailed or mailed to those of you who don't have email. And this is Thursday, August 6th. It is extremely important to this whole process that the committee get information back from that survey, where they get feedback from you who are members of this church. It is an essential piece of putting together that profile. So please do that. Please fill that out. You'll have a week to do that for your responses to be included in the profile. I want to let you know that there are some things happening here at the church that I hope you'll participate in. One of those things that happens every Sunday after church at 10:30, so in about 4 minutes, there will be a virtual coffee hour. And I did that last week for the first time. It is a lot of fun. You actually get to see some parishioners and hear a little bit about what's going on in people's lives. You do have to bring your own coffee and snacks, though. Those are not provided. But do plan to do that. There are instructions on the email that went out on Wednesday from the parish office about how to do that. And if you have any trouble doing that and can't join us this week, call the parish office and we'll help you figure that out.
This is Justin. You can hear me, but you can't see me. I'm going to start putting the link to that Zoom meeting after church on our Facebook page so people will be able to join more easily.
Thank you, Justin. Justin wears more than one hat these days. He is our organist choir master, but he is also the executive producer of our services. And another thing I want to bring to your attention, the EFM group is hosting and is inviting the parish to participate in a book study that has just begun of Richard Rohr's book, The Universal Christ. We are meeting today at 4 o'clock to discuss that book. I think it's an excellent book. It is both challenging, thought-provoking, and in many ways affirming. So if you can't join us this week, get the book, either Kindle or purchase the book, and we'd love for you to join us and Deb is leading that as the EFM mentor. So I'm sure she's shaking her head yes back there. And finally, speaking of links, tithely, if you would like to, and we hope you will, consider making an offering to the church. That you can find that link on the website and on Facebook. Let us bless the Lord. Thanks be to God. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Of the world.